In this episode, I present the first of a series of recordings I made at the Global BirdFair, a lovely chat with author and broadcaster Stephen Moss. Welcome to the Casual Birder podcast. I'm Susie Buttress. As a casual birder, I take pleasure in watching the wild birds around me, wherever I am. In my show, I share the joy of birding. I tell you about the birds I've seen, speak with experts and enthusiasts, go on bird outings, and I share stories from birders around the world. Last episode, I sat with local resident Natasha at a small bay in Shetland, watching the birds around us. Do take a listen. Well, Global BirdFair has been and gone. I was there for all 3 days, and it was a wonderful opportunity to meet up with old friends, make new ones, find out about spectacular birding areas, both nearby and around the world, and to take the opportunity to try out various optics. There were also a range of wonderful talks on. Unfortunately, I didn't manage to get to as many talks as I wanted because there just didn't seem to be enough time in the day to do all the things I wanted to do. But my husband attended the talks and he got very inspired by what he was hearing. Being at BirdFair gives you a real opportunity to meet up with prominent people in the birding world, and I was delighted to chat with naturalist, author and BAFTA award-winning television producer Stephen Moss. He produced the very popular series Birding with Bill Oddie and has worked with Bill on several other productions, including Springwatch. He's written many books, including the recent and very popular Mrs. Moreau's Warbler, How Birds Got Their Names, and Skylarks with Rosie, A Somerset Spring, and as you'll hear, a series of biographies of bird species. Stephen Moss, it is absolutely wonderful to meet you. I'd just like to ask you a little bit about what you're currently doing and how you're finding BirdFair. So let's talk about BirdFair first. It's a really hot day today. We're in the gannetry, which is the tent where everyone is coming to eat their lunches. So there is background noise. But anyway, it adds to the ambience. So, Stephen, how are you finding this year's Global BirdFair?
Well, as you say, Susie, the fact there's background noise is fabulous because it means there's lots and lots of people here, thousands of people. And I was really worried when I drove up on Friday, yesterday afternoon. I thought I might get here and there might be all the exhibitors and no visitors. And fantastically, it is absolutely packed. I first came to BirdFair in 1992. It was the 4th bird fair. I knew no one. And in the 30 years since, I've seen it grow and it's become part of not just my life, but my family's life, and so many friends here, many of whom I only see at BirdFair. And it's back, and I'm actually really emotional about it. It's really made me so happy.
That's fantastic to hear. And as you were saying about how the connections are really important to you, the other people that I've spoken to, you know, it's so hard to keep connected, and especially the last couple of years has been really hard. But to know that there are so many people around that have similar values, you know, that we want to do something for conservation, we want to, you know, we love the birds, we love nature, we want to make a positive difference. And to be surrounded by people with that same passion is just amazing. And yeah, and all the connections, you know, people that you've seen, that you've worked with before or that you've spoken to before, to actually see them in the flesh again has been really, like you say, really touching. Now, you mentioned that you'd started coming in 1992 and that, you know, you hadn't really known many people then. But now you write a column for The Guardian. You've worked on many TV presentations and you actually produced them?
Yeah, I produced Birding with Bill Oddie was the start of it all back in the mid-90s. Yeah, the first series I produced about birds, I'd actually been in the BBC for 14 years making education programmes, and we came up with the idea called Birding with Bill Oddie right at the start of my career when I first met Bill. And 13 years later we did it, and that changed my life. I moved to the BBC Natural History Unit in Bristol. I was series producer of the very first Springwatch. I travelled to all the world's continents to either film or write about birds. So I turned my hobby into my job, which is the best thing I ever did. I was in my late 30s when I did it, and I honestly at that stage thought, I don't want to do this because, it's really good to have a job I enjoy, which I did as an education TV producer. But it was the best thing I ever did because obviously I got to work with so many wonderful people. So after a year or so, I got a job at the BBC Natural History Unit in Bristol and sort of never looked back. We did Spring Watch, I went to Antarctica with Michaela Strachan, I interviewed Sir David Attenborough a couple of times, which obviously is a pretty awesome experience. I worked with Bill Oddie on a huge number of series and programmes. And, that was alongside writing books and articles about birds. So I am very busy. I think someone once said that's not writing, that's typing. Or as my friend Brett Westwood says about my books, the covers of this volume are too far apart. But he loves me, really.
You mentioned that you had moved into producing, but why natural history? How did that come about?
Oh, I've been obsessed by birds literally since before I remember. So my late mother, who died 25 years ago now, bless her, she used to tell me that at the age of 3, she took me down to the River Thames in the suburbs where we lived in West London to feed the ducks. Very universal thing that all kids do. And I asked her, I said, what are those funny black ducks? And she said, I don't know, dear, but we've got a book at home. And that book was the Observer's Book of Birds, something many older listeners will be familiar with. Mostly black and white. The funny black ducks were, of course, coots. I was quite a precocious child. My mum was a single parent, so my nan stayed at home and brought me up while my mum went out to work. My nan taught me to read when I was 2, and so I literally read this book from cover to cover, and that was it. And I don't remember any of that. I can't remember not being obsessed by birds. And so, of course, as soon as I joined the BBC, I want to do a programme about bird watching. No one was interested. Bill wanted to do it, I wanted to do it, and it took us years, but we got it done in the end.
And thankfully so, because that was one of the instrumental shows for many of us when we were younger. What is it about birds that attracts you so much?
Well, the thing about birds is they are literally everywhere. Any time of year, any season, any time of the day or night, you can see or hear birds. And so, as my friend Sean Dooley in Australia once said, people ask me where I go bird watching as if it's something you go to do. Whereas actually, I'm talking to you now, but my eye is being, if an osprey flew over, I'd be like, oh, osprey. And it's like, you always have this. I work in an office in my garden in Somerset, and I see a bird flying by. I was on the phone to Mary Colwell, my fellow nature writer, recently. 4 white birds flew over. I said, Mary, got to go. Cattle egrets. When she understood. But so, birds are like that. Mammals aren't. To study mammals, you've got to be really dedicated. To study insects, it's great, but mostly in spring and summer, not exclusively, of course. So I think that's why birds are so popular, of course. There isn't a British fish watching fair, is there? Or, global insect fair? Not yet. But yeah, birds are magical, and they can fly, most of them, which we hanker after, I think, and they're just magical creatures.
It's lovely hearing you talk about it that way, because with such kindred spirits, that's exactly how I feel about them. One of the things I've learned through my show is that often people won't even realise how many birds are around or even that they're there, but you just need to draw people's attention to them, and it opens up a whole new world. I know you've just recently you've been recently started a series of books where you talk about biographies of birds.
Well, funnily enough, a lady came up earlier and she said, I really love your bird biography. She said, because I'm not a real birder, I'm just a garden bird watcher. And I said, no, you are a real birder. You just watch birds where you live. Yeah, I started with the robin, thanks to my friend David Lindo, who's over there at the moment. And David, of course, had done that Britain's Favourite Bird survey, and the robin came top. And I thought, no one's written a book about the robin for a while. And I deliberately called it the Robin a Biography, because what I aim to do, and I think it developed with the robin, and it's very much extended since, is I aim to combine what I call the 2 robins. There's the real robin that frankly doesn't give a toss about us and goes about its daily life, sometimes interacting with us when it needs food or shelter, but generally not. And then there's the cultural robin, the other robin, which is just as real, which is the robin of Babes in the Wood. It's the robin of Who Killed Cock Robin. It's the robin of popular culture and high culture. And the same, of course, was then true of the wren and the swallow and the swan, which were the 4 I've done so far. And for me, as a non-scientist, the behaviour and the distribution and the, if you like, the reality of the bird is very interesting, but it's not enough. I have to write about how we interact with birds. It's become, I suppose, my speciality, whereas my dear friend Dominic Cousins, who's a really good scientist, writes brilliantly about bird behaviour using wonderful analogies with us. Very, very good at this. His famous line, "A rook sounds like a crow who's been on an anger management course." And I couldn't think of that. That's genius. But I write trying to combine both the science and the facts about the bird with the culture. And something very strange happened as I was writing the robin, and it's been true of all the other birds, is that all the cultural references, or almost all the cultural references to a particular bird, relate to some aspect of its behaviour. So, for example, the robin, of course, comes and joins us when we're gardening. The reason it does that is robins evolved to follow wild boars in forests in Europe and Asia, and there weren't any wild boars in Britain for a very long period, so they followed us instead. Therefore, we think of robins as tame. We feel a connection with them. And that's based on this behaviour, and we then turn it into a story. The same is true of the swallow. Sailors get tattoos of swallows, not because swallows travel, it's part of that. It's because swallows fly far from home, but they come back to the same place. And so the tattoo of a swallow is saying, "I will return." And that's a very, it's a sort of intensely powerful connection we have with the birds. As someone said to me, well, you can carry on writing these books till you're 126 because there's so many birds. I'm now looking at, I wanted to do the sparrow, partly because it's the bird we took for granted for so long, and then we realised we shouldn't. But my publishers have suggested owls. So you're hearing this for the first time. It may not happen. I'm hoping next week we'll sign the deal. And I'm hoping to do owls for the Christmas after this, and then perhaps sparrow after that.
That's absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to me now. I hope that we'll be connecting again in the future. But for now, I hope you enjoy the rest of BirdFair, and thank you very much for joining me on the Casual Birder podcast.
Thank you very much, Susie. It's been a pleasure.
You can find out more about Stephen and his wonderful books on his website, stephenmoss.tv. The link is in the episode notes. This was the first year of Global BirdFair, a new venture by Tim Appleton and his team. The decision by the Leicestershire and Rutland Wildlife Trust to end the previous Bird Fair in 2021, after over 30 years of events, had left a gap in the nature calendar that many in the community mourned. The reasons for ending the previous Bird Fair included financial risk for the Trust. The global pandemic meant the Trust made a loss, even with the event going virtual in 2020. Damage to the reserve and soil compaction, with the numbers of people attending each event, and consideration of the climate crisis. Exhibitors from around the world promoting travel, often with a high carbon footprint, didn't align with the Trust strategy to tackle the climate crisis. The new event, named Global BirdFair, addressed at least one of these issues by holding the event at a county showground, an area dedicated to exhibitions, rather than on a sensitive nature reserve. As the first event, and one that was pulled together in just a few months, the team deserve praise for what was achieved. I hope very much that there will be future Global Bird Fairs, and I hope that the team looks for ways to be attractive to a wider range of birders. The attendees were very much of the middle and older generations. I include myself in this. The challenge, I think, is to extend the offerings away from expensive equipment and vacations, and focus on education and the fun of birding for all, bringing wider perspectives to the talks, showcasing communities that have made a difference to their local areas, and using innovative ways to attract more diverse attendees. If you'd like to help support the show's production, you can contribute to the show's tip jar. The easiest way to do this is to buy me a virtual coffee at ko-fi.com. You'll find the link in the episode notes. As I mentioned, BirdFair is a fantastic opportunity to see old friends and make new ones. I'd like to give a shout out in particular to my long-time Twitter friend Mel @ShepherdWells on Twitter, who I was delighted to finally meet, Shailesh Patel, who goes by Patel by Nature on Twitter, long-time supporter of the show, Boris Belchev from Alcedo Wildlife Tours, Emily Broad, who runs the Women's Birding Group on Facebook, and who I met in the chat of the virtual bird fair from 2020, and Alice Hunter, who is A Hunter Photos on Instagram, who regularly takes part in my What Bird Wednesday quiz. It was awesome to meet up with so many nature and wildlife podcasters there. Hannah and Eric from Hannah and Eric Go Birding. Unfortunately, we only managed to connect for about 10 minutes because there's just so much to do and so many people to speak to. But it was wonderful to actually see them in person. They'd travelled all the way over from Oregon, and while here managed to go to Bempton Cliffs to see puffins and over to Minsmere to see the Wader Spectacular. I'm very impressed with their energy. Ryan Dalton from Into the Wild podcast was also there, recording interviews for his podcast at the Leica stand. I had a great time on the first afternoon chatting with him and the show's producer, Oscar, and young naturalists Indy Camille Green, George Hassel and Maya Bambrick. Shout-outs also to Charlie Bingham from Mountain Conversations podcast, Jane, the creative director of Get Birding podcast, and big congratulations to that team for winning gold in the Climate Awards category at the British Podcasts Awards last month. And I very briefly met Jack Perks from the Bearded Tit podcast. It would be wonderful if our nature podcasts could be represented at a future Global BirdFair event, maybe with a podcast stage for live interviews and stories about the natural world. Talking of podcasts, if you haven't yet listened to For What It's Earth podcast, make sure you add it to your list. Emma and Lloyd cover current issues concerning environment, sustainability and climate change, with tips to help us take actions that make a difference. I found their recent episode exploring eco-anxiety and possible solutions particularly helpful. The link to their show is in the episode notes. Do keep in touch. Tell me about your favourite sightings by leaving me a voice or email message on my website, casualbirder.com. My thanks to Randy Braun for designing the artwork for the show. The theme music is Short Sleeve Shirt by The Drones. Thanks to them for letting me use it. Check out their website at dronesmusic.net. Thank you all for listening, and I hope you'll join me again for another episode of the Casual Birder podcast.